Good morning. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Erica Morgan. I am the Director of Programs at Dress for Success Columbus, and I am excited about our conversation today, being less apologetic with Council Member Liz Brown. Hi. Good
Hi.
morning, Liz. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you today?
I am doing well, thank you. So excited to have you here and have this conversation with you.
Me too.
Thank you for joining us. So we
Absolutely.
We're going to go ahead and dive right in. I see the crowd is thriving already. So we're just going to dive right in with being less apologetic and owning your voice. And so, Liz, why do you think we say sorry so much?
Well, I think that is the foundational question, right? You know, I think apologies are really powerful actually, right? Like I think when you need to apologize and when you really nail an apology, it's a powerful thing. But the other side of that coin is that we as women are really taught to maybe go to an apology too quick, right? And I think that has to do with the sort of courteousness and politeness that we're taught. Women need to take up a little bit less space. And if we take up too much space, we've got to apologize for that. There are such interesting studies about the email differences, the differences in email etiquette between men and women, where women start things more often with sorry to bug you, but here's this request, sorry to write you at 4:30 on a Thursday, but, and it's like we start with the preemptive apology because there's something in the culture that's told us we can't be too loud about what we need, or too obvious about what we want, right? Both of those things are sort of told us over and over. I have daughters. My oldest is 6, and I see the way in which the world already pushes that, even on a 6-year-old.
Yes, thank you. I try to really be mindful that to not start an email or just start with saying sorry to bother you, because it definitely has become a habit in our culture. And so I really try to stay away from that. So thank you for that. I totally agree.
Yeah.
So many of us have been raised to be polite and courteous, though, right? And with that comes expectations of being respectful and never interrupting. And when we do encounter that, we immediately start to apologize. How do we retain our brains to quit this habit, especially if something isn't our fault and it's out of our control?
Yeah, Erica, that is such a great point. I mean, we are raised to be polite and courteous, and for good reasons, right? We do. It is a positive thing to put that energy out in the world of being polite and treating people how you want to be treated. So it's not to diminish what politeness and courtesy can do when it's the energy you put out, but it's as you rightly point out, we then, on the other end of that, if we sort of violate those norms, it's somehow our fault. And we women are often the ones that really have to jump in and start apologizing. And your point about never interrupting is a really good one. I would never, again, I'm a mother. I would never, you know, tell my kids they should interrupt people, right? Like we do want people to finish their thoughts, to engage in respectful conversation with one another. But I see a commenter put in about finding the balance, and that's exactly right. We have to find the balance because so often you'll be engaged in a conversation and someone might be using your politeness and courtesy against you and really using that um, to railroad your thinking, right? To monopolize the conversation and make it solely about their perspective. And if you're in a room where someone else is completely monopolizing the perspective and not allowing your voice into the space, there actually is good reason to interrupt. And there is a polite way to do that, because that's then owning your voice and bringing a perspective to the table that would be completely ignored if you didn't have that kernel of confidence to get in there and say, this is an interruption, but I'm not interrupting because I've got something to say.
Interrupting with purpose. I love that.
That's right.
Uh, I love it. There is a question in the chat, and I do want to take a just throw this in that if you have a question, you're tuning in, please feel free to drop it in the chat, and we will try our best to make sure that we get to it. So the chat question says, in a time when the rights of women are in jeopardy, how can we as women use our voices to fight for our rights and the things that mean the most to us?
I love that question. I think that everyone has different channels in their daily life where they can use your voice. I think one thing I tend to find women, my sisterhood, to be really good at is community, building a community and a collective voice. And that is one of the most powerful ways to fight for our rights, is when we're doing it collectively. And I know that, and frankly, that's what Dress for Success is built around: harnessing the sisterhood, harnessing the power of women and the power of women in community to deliver for one another. Right? Like we are the ones who will be there for one another. And I'm thinking a lot about the teacher strike here in Columbus this week, and the teaching workforce, the educating workforce in CCS are largely women. Their voices came together to the table. I mean, I was out there with my kids on the picket line with their teachers. My kids are CCS students, and so we went to bring donuts to their teachers on the strike. And there were, of course, men out there who are also educators, but overwhelmingly it was a group of women saying, we're fighting for ourselves and our own working conditions, but we're actually fighting for our students. And so when we can build that community together, so often what you see the sisterhood, if you will, or women doing, is not just fighting for their own rights, but how those rights actually help the whole community. They help ourselves, they help our kids, and they build a better future.
There is definitely power in sisterhood and unity. Absolutely. So, Liz, when is it appropriate for women to apologize? And how do you apologize with confidence?
Love this. This is what I meant at the beginning when I said, apologies are actually powerful, and we should
Yeah.
become familiar with how to do them and how to do them with confidence, as you said. But we don't want to over apologize, right? Starting
Right.
the statement with a sentiment of "I'm sorry." The way I look at it, I think there are a couple times where it is really appropriate to apologize, whether you're a woman or a man, right? Totally agnostic of gender. It is appropriate to apologize when you've harmed someone. And it's also appropriate to apologize, I want to say this loudly, to your children. So I'm going to break those two up because they're a little different. I'm going to start with apologizing to your children. So for anyone who might have kids who's listening, I will just tell you, we're all kind of flying blind when we have our first kid. Like, we might read the books about how to, have a baby or raise a child, but like, you don't really know what you're doing until you're doing it. And parenting requires so much of you. Often, like, my cup is really depleted. It's really hard to fill my cup. I have 3 children. I'm like constantly maxed out. And so my patience is not always great. And they know how to test me, right? Those little people know how to test you. And when your patience is thin and you're being tested, you can snap, you can yell, you can not treat them with the graciousness they deserve as people, not just as your people, but as people themselves. And when I've done that and felt a lot of guilt over it. And I was listening to this podcast once where another parent on it just said, like, embrace the idea of apologizing to your child, because we don't always get it right. And it feels so much better to repair than to be racked with that guilt. I snapped at my children. I was at a council meeting really late one night, and I was kind of on duty all on my own that night. I'd had grandparents come in and help out for while I was gone, but then it was up to me at about 9 p.m. to get them to bed, and they were wired, and I was working late, right? It was 9 p.m. and I'd just gotten home, really long day. I hadn't eaten dinner, and they were not listening to me when I put them to bed. And they were just, I don't want to go to bed. I don't want to go to bed, screaming and had all these problems and crying. And I lost it. I just yelled at them, probably worse than I've ever yelled at them. And I said, I'm leaving the room. And I went downstairs and I realized what I was feeling was actually hunger. Like, I hadn't taken care of myself, and that's why I snapped. And so after I got a little bit of food in me, I went back up and they had calmed down, and I just told them the whole thing. I just apologized and I said, look, Mama hadn't taken care of herself. I was so hungry and I let my frustrations come out instead of taking care of myself. So that was how I apologized with confidence to my kids. I said I was sorry. I said what it was for. And I explained why I was sorry, right? That I had taken my frustrations out on them and made them feel unsafe. And going through the being sorry, what it's for, and why I'm sorry, not why I did it, but why I'm sorry. You can also explain why you did it, and I included that. But I really think that those are the three key pieces of a confident apology: that you're sorry and for what, and then why you're sorry. If you see the harm that was done, you should be able to explain it, because that makes the person who's being apologized to feel better. I think it's human to offer excuses. This is why I did it. This is why I did it. And that's okay. Just evaluate whether it's appropriate in that apology. And that really helps you confidently apologize. And then, so that's in the motherhood space. And for anyone out there who struggles with this, I just really counsel you to embrace the apologizing to your children, because there's no way you get it right 24 hours a day. But then in the rest of the world, when we're in community or when we're in our workplace, I do think that a well-timed and appropriate apology is part of your power. I truly mean that, because it shows you have compassion and empathy for other people when you can see if you've done harm. I've had times where, I didn't see what someone was bringing to the table in the workspace, and I glossed over their idea, right? I wasn't being impatient or trying to be harmful, but I kind of did it inadvertently because I didn't stop and really hear all perspectives. And when I went back to that person, I did those same 3 steps of I'm sorry, what I'm sorry for, and why I'm sorry about it. Again, I in many instances evaluate whether it's appropriate to also explain like where I was coming from. But the key thing is to see the harm and to really name it, because things, people appreciate that more than we can even measure.
That see the harm and recognize it. I love
Yeah.
that. Um, so another viewer comment or question, it is said that over apologizing doesn't send a message of strength. Instead, it minimizes our presence and contribution. What advice can you give to women on how to become more self-aware and change their vocabulary? I love that question.
Oh, that is such a good question. I'm going to let it like sink in with me for a second here. So first of all, perfectly stated, like that over apologizing, it minimizes our presence. And that's kind of why we're taught to do it. I mean, going back to that example of an email or a text, right? I'm sorry to bother you. And look, we're trying to be polite. We're trying to say, I don't want to infringe on your time. It's not because we're like bad people that we start with that. Um, but I do think that I guess the advice I would give to women on how to become more self-aware and change their vocabulary is just to take the I'm sorry, but out. Just don't ever allow yourself to use it. Don't ever allow yourself to use it. And I'm not saying there's never a time where it's appropriate to add it back in, but whatever you're saying or writing or communicating, take that out. Say what you want to say without it. Just practice doing that, because that's a little trick. And I'm not saying the only time we're doing the over apologizing is in writing like that, but it's, I think, an easy thing to start with so that you become aware of how quick you might be to go to the I'm sorry but, and how much more powerful you sound when you don't use it. So if you start with that little trick, and in writing you just never allow yourself the I'm sorry but, you're going to become familiar with how that feels, right? To take that out, and it will start to leak into your to your vernacular and just your sort of everyday conversation with people. Just implementing like a little tool first. So that would be my like practical advice. But then my more I guess like atmospheric advice, right? Is just to recognize how worth it you are in every conversation you're in. You have a perspective that wouldn't be there but for you. It wouldn't be there. I don't care. Maybe someone else does look like you in the room. Maybe that's true, but you are more than just your demographics. There could be another woman. I'm a white woman. There could be another white woman. Erica, you're a Black woman. There could be another Black woman, but she's still not you, right? Your perspective won't be there but for your voice. And that's really powerful. So that's kind of, again, that like overarching advice I would give, along with the practical tip of just, putting it into play. Practice what it feels like.
Hashtag stop I'm sorry but, and I love it. I love it. And just owning the room. Come on. I love it. One thing about these Empower Her sessions is that we always have gems, and Liz, you are dropping them in the chat. The chat is proof of that. So I love it.
Thank you.
A confident and well-timed apology is part of your power. A famous quote from Liz Brown. You're going to
Love
see
them.
that going viral.
Write it on the wall.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. We love it. All right, let's check. No more questions in the comments, so we'll keep going. So, what are signs we should look for that says we are apologizing too much?
Yeah, well, one sign is checking in with yourself, and if you're bringing a lot of, if you're feeling a lot of uncertainty, it probably means your language is matching that, right? Like, so often what we internalize is a reflection of the language we use. So if we are feeling a lack of confidence, if we're feeling a lot of uncertainty and anxiety, one reason might be that we are apologizing too much. So we're not vocalizing the power that we want to feel inside. What we're vocalizing is something else. And then internally, we keep matching what it is we're putting out there externally. And I would say that is a number one sign that we're apologizing too much. Checking in with yourself. Now, of course, there are other signs. Externally, there can be signs like if people aren't taking you as seriously as you like, or if people are really running roughshod over your ideas. Checking in with yourself and saying, like, am I apologizing too much for the space I take up and therefore giving people that permission to run over me? It's not your fault if they're running over you. People should not run over you. I don't want to do like victim blaming here, but I think you know what I mean, that like taking stock of people's response can help us see what we're putting out there. But I really think the biggest sign is again what I started with, is that what we put out there externally ends up being matched by our internal feelings. And so if we put out that power, if we put out, that perspective and that ownership, we will feel more confident internally.
Love it. Check in with yourself. Hashtag check in with yourself.
Check in with yourself. That's right. That's
So,
right.
kind kind of going along with that of over apologizing, when is owning your voice and being less apologetic inappropriate or too much? And how can you tell when and what point you have gotten there? So, not apologizing enough, not never saying I'm sorry, just kind of the opposite of that.
Yeah, that is so important to keep in perspective, because either extreme has a detrimental outcome. So I would say when you're doing harm to others, right? I don't think there's such a thing as being too loud, right? It's never like, oh no, you've said too many things. You
Yeah.
must be owning your voice too much. Like, say everything that you feel moved to say. There's never too much of it, truly. But I think um, if you're doing that at the expense of other people's perspectives in the room, or you're not willing to engage in a dialogue around your voice. So I'll try to do a practical example of, like, in the workplace. If you're working on a group project and you have sort of owned too much of it to some degree, right? Like, let's say, as a council member, I'm working on a piece of legislation, and I'm just railroading through other perspectives. First of all, at the end of the day, the piece of legislation won't be as good if I haven't heard those around me. And so, again, having that moment to kind of check in with yourself, and understand, have I not allowed other perspectives in here? And if I haven't, seek them, right? Seek other perspectives and engage with them earnestly. So that doesn't mean that you just have to fold what you're thinking, right? Oh, well, this other person thinks that I shouldn't I shouldn't provide this funding to the West Side Soccer Club because we've already done too many West Side things. I'm pulling this out of thin air. This hasn't happened, but right, like this other council member thinks I shouldn't do it, so that means I shouldn't. I'm not telling you to fold. I'm telling you to engage in that conversation, um, humbly and earnestly. Okay, what is their perspective? What's my perspective? How do I make my case? You will actually be stronger when you listen to someone else's voice and then incorporate that into your own ideas. And then, oftentimes I think that, again, in politics, an important way to be is to think a lot about, even in partisan politics, right? Like, all of the discord we see in Washington, it would be healthier if both sides could, again, not fold to what the other side is thinking, but see it as valid, engage with it as an intellectual argument, because it sharpens your commitment to your own ideals.
Yeah. Love it. Ooh, the chat is blowing up. So let's see. It says, what do you do to regularly build your confidence and fearlessness to use your voice and take up space in every room you enter?
Oh boy. Well, I wish I could say I did that. I am not confident in every room, believe me. But if I'm working on the best practice, if I'm trying to show up with confidence and fearlessness, in the rooms I enter, part of it is doing my preparation. So I try to read a lot. I try to get familiarity with the subjects that I'm supposed to speak on or react to, because part of my job is not just putting forth legislation, but getting legislation presented to me from the administration. There's the executive side, that's the mayor. There's the legislative side, that's council. So a lot of times we're reviewing what the executive and administrative side want to get done. And I have to do my research, in order to confidently be in those rooms and ask the right questions. Um, Speaking of questions, I think that owning your voice, being fearless, being confident is not always about having the right answers. It is very
Yes.
often about asking the right questions, right? We can't be
Love
expected to
that.
know everything. So, we have to ask those questions. And from a council member perspective, a big part of doing the prep and doing the research is being out in the community. It's not just reading things, but like, am I attending events that continue to give me perspective from all kinds of people? Because I bring what I see in the community along with what I can read and sort of know to be analyzed in the data to those meetings, to those rooms. And that's part of trying to own my voice and know that it's worth something.
I love that, Liz. Asking the right questions. We don't always have the answer, but knowing that it is okay to ask questions is a part of being confident. And I love that. So
That's right.
thank you for saying that and sharing that with our community.
Yeah.
All right, another chat question. What is it like to be a woman in city leadership? And can you speak to any current initiatives you are leading to uplift and support women in our community?
Absolutely. So I love being a woman in city leadership. I truly do. It is so it's. I think that we are in just a wonderful time for women in Columbus when we're talking about leadership. I'm seeing so many new leaders in these new positions of influence and power and importance. So from the sort of city elected leaders position, we have a woman auditor, Megan Kilgore, first woman auditor in the history of the city, which is incredible. Lourdes Barroso de Padilla was just elected to city council last year, and I serve with her, and she is the first Latina ever on city council. And then we look around at our nonprofit leadership, and Habiba Bankston, who leads Dress for Success, is an incredible new leader in an executive position like that, right? She's been a leader in community, but this executive role is so exciting. And I'm seeing a lot of that across the community. So I feel like there is a real community and sisterhood in Columbus when it comes to leadership. But hold on. What was the second part of that question? What initiatives?
Yes.
So that's a really key part of this. I'm excited a lot about the leadership that exists, but just getting to a role and existing as a woman is not nearly enough, right? That's
Yeah.
frankly, as women, that's not what we're about. We're about using that power that we've gained to give women power to give other women power. And I think right now in our community, women have the most at stake. In this economy, coming out of COVID, there are, women exited the workforce in the greatest numbers than we've ever seen since the 1950s when we started even measuring it in the first place. And that is and then women who did stay in the workforce are taking on a larger burden of sort of dual caregiving and working than they've ever had to before. And specifically mothers are struggling with that. At the same time, a lot of mothers in Columbus are single earners or primary earners in their household. And the reality today in Columbus is as we grow, as the city increases population and prosperity, there is actually a direct correlation in percentage of people who suffer from homelessness and economic instability. There is a direct correlation with this broad prosperity and then concentrated populations left out of that prosperity. Harder to access high quality early learning opportunities, harder to access pathways to college, harder to access living wage jobs once they're out of college. These things compound. And I truly believe that if we are helping women, if we are putting women, especially women of color, at the forefront of our policy making, we're going to solve these problems, frankly, in a way that helps all of us. And so I'm really excited to be a part of women leaders in our city right now who are really committed to making a difference for women who are too often overlooked. Just recently, one package that the Women's Caucus of City Council put forward was in response to the Dobbs v. Jackson decision, which as you know, overturned the constitutional right to an abortion provided by Roe v. Wade. And then immediately, the next ingredient that's crucial to remember is that the state of Ohio, Republicans in the state of Ohio passed the heartbeat bill, which immediately went into effect, putting into place really an effective 6-week ban on abortion. And that ban is bad for all people with uteruses. Don't get me wrong, bad for everybody. However, it affects those with the least access to healthcare most. And so it was incumbent upon us to act quickly to try to mitigate the damage. We can't overturn what the state did. We have to work within the confines of the law here at Columbus City Council, but we can spearhead initiatives to help at least put a ceiling on some of that damage for our residents. So we provided a $1 million reproductive justice fund, which goes directly towards helping people navigate their reproductive needs at a time when people are more confused than ever and probably will need to travel farther than ever to get the care that they need, the abortion care that they need, if they need it. So $1 million fund. There's only one other city in the country who's done an investment of that level, and that's St. Louis. We were really proud of it, really proud of it. And that was from your women on council. Secondly, we put some clarity into place about law enforcement resources being used to investigate quote unquote abortion crimes. Pre-Roe, what would happen is there would be like a suspicious miscarriage at a hospital or something, right? And that would cause an investigation from local law enforcement. And we wanted to be clear that that's not where we're going to prioritize our resources as a law enforcement unit here in the city of Columbus. And then third, we want to keep our eye on a lot of the misinformation that's being spread by honestly the radical right wing when it comes to abortions and abortion care. And so we did a grant with a foundation to help us get a handle on what that misinformation looks like here in the city of Columbus, so we have data to act on. So Erica, that was a very long answer to your question. But as you can tell, I'm really passionate about initiatives that help women. That is just the most recent one we were able to pass. And there are so many coming up and so many we've been able to do over time. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for answering it and for sharing that information. I'm sure there's people tuning in that did not know that $1 million fund initiative was out there. So thank you for sharing that and being transparent. We appreciate that. So we're going to move right along, and how do we confidently take up space?
How do we confidently take up space?
Yeah.
So I really think that comes to like keeping your eye on the goal. I mean, in the instance I just went through, the legislation we passed for reproductive justice and abortion rights, it was a really uncertain time to be doing that work because of the national environment, because of the state environment, because of the way in which a lot of, frankly, state officials right now in Columbus, in Ohio, who are really right wing, create a culture of fear. Like they create a culture of fear if you're standing up for reproductive rights, for women in general, for abortion care. Like they want you to be fearful to do those things. And so that creates a lot of friction at the local level when you're trying to get anything done. I don't just mean like my own fear, but sort of they create that fear takes hold in a bureaucracy and makes it hard to pass important work. And so for me, rather than being cowed by that, I tried to, confidently take up the space to do good work by keeping my eye on the prize, keeping my eye on that goal. I knew that we needed to pass something by July 25th, and I asked a few too many questions for some people. They didn't like how persistent I was being, right? I was a little too skeptical of some things I was hearing. And I just kept going because the goal is that important. And I think that's how we do it. We know, like, why you're in the room. Something motivates you deeply to be in the room, and honor that. And that right there is why you should take up space.
Knowing why you are in the room, owning that, and that's why you should take up space. Owning it. I love it. So, let's go back. There's a question. How is misinformation being distributed?
Sure. So if you're talking specifically about misinformation on abortion rights, I'll deep dive that. Obviously, misinformation in general is being distributed everywhere in scary ways, and we should all investigate the news for whether it comes from a credible source. And it takes time to do that, right? Every time I see a headline, it's like, why can't I just believe this headline and move on about my day? It's like you have to have this constant muscle of, is this true or is this not? And it's kind of exhausting. But so that's broadly speaking, it's being distributed everywhere. But specifically about reproductive care and abortion care. So there are these things called crisis pregnancy centers. I don't know how many of you have heard of them, but they are clinics that over the last few decades had popped up, oftentimes nearby an abortion care clinic, in order to trap women who were going for an appointment with a doctor inside the clinic to kind of come to them instead. Or you see these billboards that say like, pregnant and scared, call blah number. And oftentimes what these are doing, not in every case, but oftentimes what they're doing is they wear white coats. The people who staff these, they're just lay volunteers. They're not doctors. They're not nurses. They're lay volunteers. They wear white coats. They appear like doctors. They see visitors in exam rooms to make the whole thing appear medical or quasi-medical. And it's not. They're not licensed medical facilities, but they present themselves that way. And we know in the sort of women's rights community, often what is stated in those are things like, you have plenty of time to think about this pregnancy, go home, take a few months, see how you feel. And they say that because they want to delay a person's decision about whether to have an abortion until she's past the time you can. Here in Ohio, since that bar was moved so low, she doesn't have much time. 6 weeks pregnant is really only 10 days late on your period. But so it has a really detrimental effect on being able to exercise your full set of options if you're in crisis. But what it also does, which I just think is so evil and craven, is it delays let's say that person chooses to keep her pregnancy and kind of maybe intended, she was scared, but that was her intention. She's now delaying prenatal care, right? Like that message that's being sent is that this is not a big deal. Just just wait. That delays prenatal care, and that leads to worse birth outcomes. And we all know we have an infant mortality crisis, especially for our Black babies. We all know that we have a maternal mortality crisis, especially for Black women. So these messages are odious. This misinformation actually has detrimental health outcomes, even if it's just maternal morbidity issues, right? Where it's maybe not resulting in death, but serious health consequences that affect a woman for the long term. So we want to get a handle on what's happening in those clinics, and we gave a grant to a foundation to help us uncover that, basically by going in and asking the right questions and investigating what's happening and putting together a report for us.
Thank you so much. There was a comment that said, "Thank you for being a champion for women in our community," and I could not agree with that more. Thank you. Thank you, Liz. All right. So, Liz, how do you manage imposter syndrome?
Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, I would say really going back to that goal. We all lack confidence at times. We all will go into a room and think, oh, do I belong here? But again, that like checking in with yourself and knowing you're there for a reason, right? Like that internal motivation, we're there for a reason. And that is so important. Whatever my North Star is, whatever my goal is in that time, staying really closely in touch with that, reminding myself of it, journaling about it, it's not just about having imposter syndrome when you get to a meeting, right? Like you might come to a meeting and think, oh gosh, this room is full of people who know more about this subject than I do. And you could have like temporary imposter syndrome trying to get through that meeting. First of all, I would say you're there for a reason. You were invited for a reason. So own that reason, whatever it is, you're there. They need you. But then broadly, a lot of times, when I first was elected, I thought to myself, like, can I really do this? And I had a long-term conversation with myself about how to measure up to this role that I was entrusted with. And that's where I think journaling can really come into play. Talking with the people you love and trust too about your honest feelings. If you say out loud what your doubts are and then say out loud what your motivation is, you're eventually going to be able to to match those two, right? And I mean, for lack of a better term, own your power there, and not have that imposter syndrome.
Hashtag on your power. Okay, let's check the chat. All right. So, well, Liz, what advice would you give to our viewers to walk away with more confidence and a sense of owning their voice?
So when it comes to our like founding subject for gathering here today about apologies, I would say I would really go back to this idea that my advice would be to put some of those tools into place, to just not incorporate apologies as much into your written word, and it will kind of infuse its way into your interactions with people and what you speak and what you put out there. So that would be one major piece of advice. Additionally, I think one way that we are more confident and don't feel we need to apologize for our voice is really getting to the root of when apologies are needed. So we talked about this earlier in our conversation, and sort of for me, it's like I apologize when my kids need it and I apologize when I do harm. So I recognize the importance of apologies. I think apologies are powerful. And when I really have that definition of why apologies are needed and how apologies are powerful, I'm not going to casually use them to diminish myself, because I know they're more than that, right? They are part of your power. Having a well-timed apology, knowing when apologies are needed is part of what is powerful and makes us powerful too. And so if we really have that definition of the use of apologies, we're going to be more confident again about not using them as like a casual tool to diminish ourselves. I think another important piece of understanding and defining apologies for ourselves is the ability to accept an apology gracefully, right? So you've been harmed, right? You've wanted an apology that you didn't get plenty of times, right? Like how many of us have gotten an apology every time we deserved one? Nope. But when you do, when someone actually sees you, sees the harm that they did, big or small, but harm nonetheless, and meets that recognition with a graceful apology, it is up to us to gracefully accept that apology. And I think in that cycle of like ourselves knowing that when we need to apologize and then ourselves knowing how to accept apologies gracefully, we will be really confident in when and where they have their place, and therefore be really confident in owning our voice the rest of the time. So that's really the advice that I would give to viewers.
Accepting apologies gracefully. I love that, Liz.
Thank you.
Hashtags. I told you, gems are always dropped during our Empower Her virtual series, and you were no stranger to dropping gems today. A confident and well timed apology is a part of your power. Hashtag stop, I'm sorry, but check in with yourself. I think that check in with yourself is very important, because if you start speaking life to yourself and positive affirmations to yourself, you start believing it, and that's where that confidence come in. So checking in with yourself before you walking into a room where you feel a little nervous, checking in with yourself when you're about to send this email and I want to apologize, check in with yourself. I love that. So you might see hashtag check in with yourself on my social media feeds over the next
Awesome.
few weeks. I love that. And then being a leader is not always about having the right answers, but it's about asking the right questions. And that was a whole word. You could probably preach a sermon on that. Because we don't always have the answers, right? And
Mhm.
so asking the right questions. I love it. And owning your power. And someone said Columbus is experiencing a lot of firsts for women, yet there is room for more. And I could not agree more with that. There is absolutely more room for more women to go into first, into leadership roles, into executive roles, and be the first woman to do whatever just right here in our city. So thank you, Anita, for saying that because it's the truth.
Absolutely.
Yes. Let's see. Let's see if there's any more questions in the chat before we start to wrap up. All right, the chat is pretty quiet. So, Liz, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to have a conversation with me and just drop all these beautiful gems with our Dress for Success Columbus community. We appreciate you, and I am grateful for you.
Well, thank you, Erica. This has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate the penetrating questions to really help us get to a good conversation. And I love the work of Dress for Success, and will support it any day of the week. So I want to thank you for being part of that mission, and all the people who are viewing today, because I know that you're cheerleaders and champions for dress in your daily life too. So 3 cheers for dress.
Yes. Thank you so much. We do have a lot coming up, so I might just hold you to that and reach out and say, come and visit us at the boutique. But October 1st, we have our Level Up Summit. So there is a save the date going out for that. It's open to all women. It's a 1-day conference with focus on leadership, career advancement, and personal development. And then August 29th and 30th, we have our Fill a Bag, aka our Fab sale, where you can come and shop and fill a bag with all of our fabulous finds that we have, from jewelry to shoes and all of our clothes, coats. We even have a luxe department. So if you are into Salvatore Ferragamo or Jimmy Choo, you just may be able to come down and grab a pair of shoes or a bag. Never know. October 29th and 30th. I hope to see you there.
I love it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and everyone have a great day and see you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.